Hey everyone, welcome back to Conversations in Pop Culture, and we are back in the saddle once again for another season. And I have with me comic creator Benjamin Hunting. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you taking the time to talk about our new book and all the other things that we're going to talk about.
I mean, it's not our new book; it's your new book.
I know
But
I say our because I'm co-creator with artist Joe Ing and designer Angela Hodge. So in my mind, it's always our, and I've got that lodged right in there.
I just want to make it clear I have nothing to do with writing the book. I'm just the interviewer, but I am very excited about your comic. It looks awesome. I did a little
Thank you.
research on it, read the first 4 pages. It is called Dead Air, and there's a lot going on with this. And before we get too much into it, and possibly me pontificating about it, what is the basic premise of the comic for those who are hearing about it for the first time?
So the premise of Dead Air is it's a world where one day a year you can talk to the dead, and this technology has become so commonplace that people just kind of take it for granted. It's like iPhones or video chat or VR. It doesn't really blow anyone's mind anymore. It's not super in the zeitgeist of the culture, and the book itself takes place in two time periods. The first being the late 90s, where a group of college radio DJ friends kind of have their lives torn apart by a tragedy. And then later on, about 15 years later, one of that group of friends uses this technology to talk to the dead, to go back and kind of explore what had actually happened. And when she discovers what actually happened, it's not at all what that group of friends had thought had occurred. And so these two timelines where you have the vibrant late 90s youth culture and then the early 2010s, kind of the same people, but they've been beaten down a bit by life, responsibility, and all that. They get back together and they have to decide how they're going to deal with this new knowledge about something they thought was dead and buried in their past, and what their relationships are like now after so many years removed from their college years and having been spread out into the world. Pretty much what happens to any group of friends from that period of time.
Yeah, let's dive into this a little bit because you kind of said that there's two stories that diverge. Obviously, they are connected. And so, what is this like? Because obviously, the tragedy happens. I think it happens with this woman named Josie in a radio station, and she dies. And correct me if I'm wrong on what happened.
Well,
I
I
don't
mean,
think,
I don't want to get too deep into what happened because that kind of gets revealed issue by issue. But you're right, Josie is the centerpiece of the tragedy that does occur, and it's her. A big part of the book is her close friendship with, I guess you could call our main character Michelle. They're both DJs, and they're very different people, but they mesh very well and they're very close. And that's the emotional center of the book, really. And then you when you go in the future and Michelle no longer has that emotional center and she's a little bit adrift in her life. She's still in touch with some of the people from the past, but the most important person's not in her life anymore. That's another big factor of the story.
yeah, because the reason why I want to bring this up is that obviously these individuals in college, Michelle, they're all in college and it's like the late 90s and their life is just beginning. And
Yes.
obviously she's working in a radio station, a college campus, and they're kind of figuring out what they want to do with their lives. And they're really building their first friendships in college. And so, what is this like? Because that starts off very positive and the future's all bright, but we also know from the start of the book that that's in the past. And it's a very interesting vibe. And so, what is that like to create? Because you are diverging where we sort of know the middle of the story, I feel.
Mm.
And we start in the middle. We don't know how it's going to end, but then we see how we got to the middle and how that's going to sort of, I guess, transform the end.
Yeah, so it's interesting to write because you kind of have essentially two sets of characters, even though they're the same characters. Because I think part of why I elected to tell the story this way was you get to explore the effect of trauma over time. It's how that changes a person when you first see them, and you pointed it right out. It's like at that point in life, you're just leaving college, you're super excited about the future. You don't know what the future is going to hold, but generally you feel pretty good about it, or at least most of these characters do. And then something happens that, I mean, it's a tragedy on its own, but it's also something that shows you can't predict what's going to happen. And you don't necessarily have control over what happens to you or your friends. And being confronted with that reality really early on can change the trajectory of someone's life. I mean, at least in my experience. And I wanted to explore what that trajectory being altered looks like 10, 15 years later when you get those same groups of people together and you see how some of them have managed to kind of push forward into the future they thought they'd have, but there's also some of them that were marked by it to the point or had other things happen to them that threw them off the path that they had expected. I mean, speaking for me, I'm nowhere near the path I expected I'd be on when I was that age. So some people manage to stay on it. Some people like me get like way sidetracked. And I think that's interesting to look at.
Yeah, I want to stay in the 90s for 10 seconds
Okay.
more because obviously she's building relationships, she's in the radio scene, and then, this event happens that completely sideswipes her. And so, what is that like? Because, we get this very joyous start and a very fun experience, and then out of nowhere, they get sideswiped.
So
And
it's nice that you noticed the joyous art because that was a real conscious choice. Joe and I talked a lot about how we wanted to present the two eras, and when we went to the '90s, we wanted to not just kind of take advantage of the color palette and whatnot that you expect from that era, like the brighter teals and the pinks and the purples and all that stuff, but when you think back on like the 90s, I was that age roughly at that period of time, and when you think back on that part of your life and it's an energetic part of your life and whatnot, you kind of see it a different way than you see your current life. And we wanted to reflect that in the art and have it be like, okay, you still have enough energy to stay up till 4 in the morning on a radio station, talking to a microphone about how excited you are about music. And that's something that's very hard to carry through to later adulthood, like that energy, that passion. And there's so many other things to compete for your attention. So yeah, being able to create that energy with the art, I think sustaining that energy through the tragedy that's going to occur later in the story is just going to give it more of a bite. It's going to give it more of an edge and more make it feel more real to the people because those emotions that you're feeling when you're at that age, they're not all positive. So just like you feel these huge highs, when the lows come, they can hit you really hard because you don't necessarily have the life experience to give you context to deal with them.
you mentioned something interesting about even the 90s. And one of the things that's really cool right now is that the 90s are super hot, where they are just very exciting and people are remembering them. 90s memorabilia is really hot. 90s music is sort of making a comeback as far as people, you know, who grew up in the 90s are now starting to have kids and they want to introduce their kids to what they were listening to
Yeah.
as a bunch of other stuff and they want to relive their childhood. And so what is that like too? Because this in some ways is a 90s story. It's
Yes.
also a 2010 story as well. And what is that like? Because it hits really, I guess, the pop culture realm and what people are really wanting and asking for.
Yeah. So for me, I'm super passionate about music and I always have been. So one of the cool things about picking that period of time pop culture wise is there were so many different it was right at the end of the monoculture in a lot of ways where back in that period if you wanted to hear some new music or you wanted to be introduced to a new artist, it was a lot harder than it is now. And especially if like the characters in this book and for me personally, you grew up in a smaller town where a lot of the media was coming in from somewhere else. So being able to take each of those characters and kind of lock them into not I wouldn't say a stereotype, but something that's like we have a character who's really into goth music. We have a character who's a country music DJ. We have a character who's into metal. We have a character who's into alternative rock. And at that point in your life, you can kind of make your musical preferences your entire personality. And like you dress a certain way and you read the same kind of magazines and you try to hang out with people who are into the same music you are. But if you live in a really small town and there's like you might be the only goth person in your town, right? So you have no context for what you're doing. You're trying to become the best goth you can be, but a lot of it's coming from outside media. So you almost double down on that part of your personality. And I think if you live in a larger city and you have a community, you can be more of an individual. But I think in a smaller town, you kind of picking up on the highlights of what the subculture is going to be. So that was really looking at that part of the 90s was a real driving factor. And I know Joe, he really enjoys drawing these characters in their various, scene specific wardrobes because it lets him go back in time and kind of revisit that, but also there's an energy to that, to like someone who's so passionate about what they wear that everything, every piece of clothing is like meticulously decided for before they leave the house.
See, it's interesting because I don't remember the 90s. I'm 30. And so I was like born in 93. I was
Okay.
7. The only thing I remember from the 90s was like Pokemon, and that's it. And I remember partially the Spice Girls and maybe the Backstreet Boys, but that was sort of going into 2000.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I don't remember anything from the 90s. And that's it. I mean, I've seen that 70s show, which I think came out around in the 90s, but that's about it. But I remember that later on. And so it's so interesting because I can imagine though, that people who are fans of the 90s and grew up in the 90s and remember it are like, oh, I get it. Um, but I do want to back out of all of that. I want to talk about the other side, which is the 2010 side of this story, because that's kind of you setting up the 1-2 punch, I feel, where now in 2010, Michelle can talk to the dead and she can talk to Josie and she could figure out what happened. And I think in the first 4 pages, which are free to read, she says it's taken me 15 years to get to this point to talk to Josie for the first time using this technology. And gotcha, shit's about to sort of be revealed, I feel. So what is that like to kind of set it up that way where we're about to learn what maybe really happened and things aren't so gray or they're not so black and white, they're really gray.
Yeah, that's a perfectly, that's a really great way to put it. Talking about the grayness, and especially when you consider we're talking about memory, which is not reliable. It's been proven over and over again that human beings are not really all that good at accurately reflecting what actually happened, even if it happened to them. So you introduced the technology. We call it DTalk in the book. Just like we wanted to pick a fun acronym that sounded kind of like it would be like one of those late night infomercial medical drug kind of things, and kind of like a tech company. And you take a technology like that, which kind of allows you to pierce through not just the mortal veil, but also memory, because you can talk to people from the past who remember your past that you can't talk to anymore. And you get to when you have a technology like that kind of as a centerpiece of the book, it's more interesting for me to look at how it affects society and the characters themselves than kind of how the technology works. So the detox tech, it lets us have a mystery going on in two time periods, because the people in the 90s don't know something bad's going to happen. The people in the 2010s, it's already happened to them, but all of a sudden not the way they thought it did. So you have these two, it's the same people trying to figure out two very different things that are happening to them or have happened to them. And being able to move back and forth, that I think you create a tension in the story and a tension between the characters over time.
Yeah, let's dive into this because this is what's super fascinating in so many ways. Where Josie obviously got killed and it was an accident, it was a tragedy. So she has a different perspective of what happened. She also has probably a different perspective of the relationships that were forming, things and who was being, I guess, supportive, not supportive, and also whose fault it was, if it was anybody's fault. And Michelle, on the other hand, on the other side, obviously has grief and feels that it was her fault. And I don't think that's anything revealing too much. And this creates a very interesting, I guess, dynamic between the two of them, where now, how do you have this conversation? And
Mm-hmm.
what is true? What is just your perception? What is you grieving with it? And what really happened? And was there foul play involved? And that's what's so interesting about this whole thing, because maybe what Michelle knows isn't exactly the truth. It's just what she saw. She only knows half of what was really going on with 4 or 5 other people
And
involved
and
in the whole thing.
and imagine living with that kind of pain for 15 years, to the point where you're not even capable of reaching out to, you know, your best friend that you can do now because of this technology, and then discovering that what you've been beating yourself up about all those years, or the pain that you've been feeling, might be misdirected or might be in some way just a really shocking revelation about, you know, yourself personally. I think even in the absence of what actually happened, the idea of someone who is feels so much guilt or so much pain that they can't reach out to someone they loved so much, is itself it's a tragedy for that character. You know, like pain kind of begets pain in life. And if you don't leave that part of yourself, or you don't find someone who can help you leave that part of yourself, you can get trapped in kind of a cycle that keeps you from making connections, that keeps you from loving even yourself. And these are all one of the cool things about this story, I think, for me as a writer, is having so many different characters and a little bit larger world that I'm used to working in. It lets me get to know them better across a longer timeline. And that just makes them more interesting to me. And the more interesting a character is, the better I write for them. And that's something I've really noticed as we've moved through working, behind the scenes on the different issues of Dead Air.
Yeah, I'm not going to press too hard into that because I feel like we're going to start pulling threads and it's going to be revealing certain things. But even to talk about that a little bit too, because one of the things is that obviously some of these friends, and I put that in air quotes, might not be friends anymore. They might not have been friends in the first realm. And things are about to be massively revealed or at least shifted. And I don't even know if that is real or if that is Josie just pissed off at Michelle or Michelle's input, or if this technology actually works, or if it's just playing off of some AI. There's a lot of stuff that could happen, and I guess keep going. And what is that like to play with too? Because things are now going to change because of this conversation, and perceptions of people are going to change. And how Michelle obviously deals with these people after this conversation is going to change, and it's also going to change before. And so, what is that like too? Because there's consequences
Yeah.
with this conversation where there's 15 years conversation after conversation.
Yeah, it's the most interesting thing that can happen to a character is that that character changes, right? So if you can give them multiple opportunities to do that within the framework of the same story, you can really set up interesting confrontations. People confronting themselves, people confronting people they thought were friends, or even in some cases, people healing relationships that had been torn apart by something, and then new information comes into play, and someone realizes maybe they had judged someone incorrectly, or maybe now that they're older they understand why certain decisions were made. It's change across time is such a fascinating thing in my own life. Just seeing, I'm really lucky in the sense that I have a lot of friends that I've been friends with for a very long time. Even Joe and Angela, my collaborators on this book, I've known them for 25 years, and we've only been working together to create comic books for about 5 years now. But we've obviously changed a lot over a quarter century. And it's I think one of life's gifts is being able to see your friends change and grow. And it doesn't always work out in the sense that, sometimes they drift away from you, or sometimes they might take their lives in a negative direction. But being able to see them grow is much better than the alternative, where they're not given the opportunity to have a future. And both of those things are at play in Dead Air, where you have someone who's missing from a friend group, and the rest of the people, moving forward with their own lives while still having this hole, not just in the friend group, but in themselves, that's related to that.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I also think that it's also touching upon an element of society, even going beyond this story, where people don't know how to deal with grief. I also think that people, and I'm going to use COVID as a perfect example, where I think COVID created an isolation effect for a lot of people. And I think it created a hole, and I think people also have changed because of that. And I think this also touches upon that niche to some degree as well, where it is clear to me that this is not just about a person dying and saying goodbye. There's a much larger allegory being in play here, I feel.
I really wanted to look at the effect that something like a technology that allows you to speak to the dead would have on society at large. There's in this series we're going to be touching on things like, what does that do to organized religion? What does that do to, in the sense that you have these religious traditions that are based on the fact that there's no two-way conversation between the dead and the living, right? It's a lot of that conversation is brokered between a god or a series of ceremonies and whatnot. And that's going to affect established religions, but it's also potentially going to create new ones where people they are either worshiping this technology or they hate it. Like there's always extreme reactions to any kind of societal change, and it can be very isolating. It can bring people together, but any technological change can be isolating. I mean, you think about COVID, where we were isolating ourselves to keep ourselves safe from sickness, and a whole bunch of technologies sprouted up that were intended to allow us to connect to each other in those periods of isolation, like what we're using right now. The video chat technologies come so far in terms of being popularly accepted, being used not just on your phone while you're talking to a friend, but entire companies are run that way now. But as we move out of the need to be completely isolated in order to stay safe from COVID, we're still using these technologies. We're still staying isolated using a technology that was intended to bring us together during a period of isolation. Like there's unintended consequences to these technologies that you can't always predict.
Yeah, and let's talk about another side of this too, because you touched upon it too, where obviously this is all franchise now, and this is a big money maker as well. Where what wouldn't you pay is to speak to your loved one who
Yeah.
passed on, and what does that look like? And the fact that it's franchised, and even that effect, and also how much does it cost, and all that stuff, and even just that conception, and even the idea of how are we connecting where their world and our world lines up as well as in play, and what does that all mean as well? And so there's a lot of little things that are being touched upon here and there, and a lot of seeds. I don't know if we're going to get answers to certain questions, because the way I view this story, and I might be wrong here, is I view it more as a relationship story with all that stuff being background noise but relevant to kind of set the tone. But that's not the focus of the story. But I could be wrong on that.
No, you're quite perceptive. I mean, the most interesting thing in any story is the characters and how the characters relate to each other and how they grow, right? And coming up with the idea of detox, the talking to the dead technology, is a way to explore those characters. That's ultimately what it is. It's a way to facilitate two cool mysteries that are going to be hopefully interesting to the reader, but also give the characters that are involved room to become themselves and room to maybe move past themselves. And part of when we were coming up with the idea for the technology and essentially the hook of the story, being able to talk to the dead, we wanted to put restrictions on it too, because you don't want to just have it be like a hand wavy. You can do absolutely anything, and there's no real limits to the technology. We wanted it to feel real in the sense that, well, it works in this. You can do it one day a year. How far back can you go? Do people always have to answer when you make the call? Can you just call anyone at all? Do you have to have some kind of connection to them? These are all things that we tried to think about, and the best that we can put them down on the page so that the reader has context and kind of a firm footing in the technology, and they don't feel like it's just magic, like, and it'll work to the convenience of the plot.
I also like the fact that it's only one day a year. And I think that that's something that's also really cool too, is that, and I don't know if it's one day a year, depending on who passed away and who you're contacting, or if it's legitly everybody in the world gets this one day. Um, but either way, I think it's super interesting that you only have one day. And that's what's so interesting too, is that what are you going to talk about on that day?
Yeah, it's like when you limit access to a resource, it becomes more precious, right? That's just generally how it works. People take it more seriously. And I think, the idea that even with that limitation, people are starting to kind of detox is just something that's in their lives. It's the Concorde was a supersonic jet that flew across the Atlantic, and it got you to London in like 2.5, 3 hours from New York. And that's pretty amazing compared to how long it normally takes, right? But after a few years, it was just another thing that you did. It was just another, if you had the money, you could do it, and it would be a convenience to you, and it stopped being this amazing thing. And I think with being able to talk to the dead, it's the same kind of deal. It's like when it first comes out, wow, this is world changing, but we all know that every type of world changing technology eventually becomes yesterday's technology, and it becomes either part of your life or it's not, and you make that decision. So that's part of what we were trying to get at with the story as well.
And then it's interesting too, because when you talk to the dead, that's going to influence you. Obviously, with this story, it's heavily influenced. And then there's the day after,
Yeah.
there's the day before, there's the day that you do this, and there's the day after. And that's where this gets really interesting is that what did your conversation with the person you spoke to who passed on bring into your life? And it could be a good, conversation. It could just be, you speak to your mother that passed away, and now, you had a lovely conversation, or it could be a much heavier conversation. That's what gets so interesting about this. And I'm even just thinking further down the line that a sequel could pursue with another person. There could be murder mystery stuff going on. I mean, think about it. If you were murdered and you don't know who killed you, but the person you're speaking to can identify their murderer, I mean, you can solve a case
That was
pretty
that was
quickly.
that was something that, what you just brought up was something that we had to think about when we were talking about the limitations. Like, is information you get during a detox session admissible in court? Every country in the world would have to make that decision, and they would have to. And do all the countries make the same decision? And is it going to apply to every type of court case? And there were some other aspects of it that, what you were just talking about in terms of the day before and the day after. When I first started writing this, I didn't necessarily know how I was going to show other characters interacting with the technology. I was like, is it just going to be Michelle? Is she going to be the one who's like the linchpin of the story? She goes in, it happens once, and then we move on. And I talked not just with Joe and Angela about it, but also our editor, Sebastian Gerner. And he was like, if you have multiple characters who are, you see vignettes or you see flashbacks or whatnot of them using detox in their regular lives, that could be a really interesting way to gain insight into who they are, because who they choose to talk to tells you so much about their character. And it doesn't necessarily tell you, it straight up shows you right on the page like who they are in a way that you wouldn't necessarily be able to describe otherwise. And it kind of threads the technology into the tapestry of their lives in a way that I didn't initially consider, because like for me it was a plot device at first, but then we really wanted to dive into it and be like, how can we make it more than a plot device? How can we make it a part of the world that feels lived in, that feels real for these characters?
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. And then even just going further into the whole detox thing, and does the person who you're speaking to, if they've been through one and they already spoke to somebody else, maybe years prior, does that affect that conversation? And even, all of Michelle's friends and Josie's friends, have they spoken to Josie, and is Michelle aware? And then you get that whole discussion, and that could be in play. And it's really fascinating because it go in so many different directions at once. And that's what's beyond interesting about this, where there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's complicated, but it's not in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the kind words about it. It's definitely something that, like, I'd started working on the rough outline for this story almost a year ago. And I knew I wanted to talk about 90s college radio because music's a passion for me, and I was really interested in that era, but I also wanted to the previous book that we had worked on together, my co-creators and I, Code 45, we approached what's that? Oh, 45. Very cool. I gotta start doing that. The blur makes it look like I'm flipping you off, but I'm not. But yeah, we talked about death and grieving and how that echoes through generations. And I wanted to talk about that again, but differently. I didn't want it to be, I wanted the tragedy to be a little bit more spread out instead of just being focused on one person. And I started to think about, what could there's so many ways you can create a story where people are communicating from the dead to the living, and I didn't want it to be supernatural. And then I remember just walking into the kitchen, and my partner was sitting there at the table, and I looked at her and I'm like, one day a year you can talk to the dead. Like, it just hit me in the head, that sentence. And she was like, that's it, you got it. And it all flowed from there. And about 5-6 months later, I was talking to Joe and Angela about it. I had a formed story in my head, and I'm like, are you two interested in getting on board with this? Is this an idea that's worth pursuing, or is it too crazy? What do you think? And they had some really great feedback and input on it, and we kind of moved forward from there.
Yeah, let's actually talk about that, because I was speaking to somebody. I don't know if you know who Tom Hutchinson is from Big Dog Inc.
No.
So I was talking to him about my story, and he said, "Oh, dude, you have to do that because if you don't do that in 2 years, I'm going to steal it from you.
There's
And
pressure. That's motivation.
but I could see in his eyes that he's very encouraging, and he was like, "Oh, you should do that, and you should do it this way, and you should simplify all of it." Because I was pitching him a more complicated idea, and he gave me really good advice. And so I'm working on it, and I have the opening scene. The opening scene is going to be one of my favorite movies. I'm
Nice.
taking the whole thing out of it. Like, I get it completely. It's gonna be great, but the idea is that you could see the light go off in his head and in mine too in the conversation we had. So what is that like when you know you hit gold? Because it's a weird thing, right? When you know you have it.
It's I think for me it's when you know the story's connected with someone else, like you just said, like when you see the light in their eyes, it's because what you said reached across from your brain to their brain, and like there's a connection there, and that person understands what you're saying. And anytime you can get like a reader or someone you're in a conversation with to understand the concept that's just been living in your head until that moment, that's an amazing feeling. That's when you know that, okay, I made one person understand it. How about I try for two? How about I try for 10? How about I try for however many people want to read this book? And that's where it gets really encouraging.
It's so interesting. It's so interesting. And then obviously there's just a million things that are going on with this. But I am curious because I don't know how many issues you're planning to do with this. If you're planning to do, because I know it's not just one. Hopefully it's not just one. It might be just one. I don't know.
No, it's not just one. We're looking at, I think right now it's 6 or 7. That seems to be a good number to get this story out. And we've also talked about maybe doing some origin stories for the characters, like what they were like before they got to college or how they got to the college radio station. Because as we get to know them better, there'll be interesting ways to kind of peek at their lives. But that's kind of where we're looking right now in terms of the full story.
And so, what is that like? Because I don't know how long this story is taking place over, as far as obviously we're spanning 15 years, give or take, throughout where they are 90s and time skipping. But I don't know as far as the present day how many hours or days, or if it's multiple years following this and multiple sessions. I'm not exactly sure, but what is that like to figure all that out? Because is this like a 1 day or a 1 week type of story
No,
as far as the birthday, or is it like 6 years?
it's longer than one day than one week for sure. I think that, as it's planned now, you're looking at the end of the semester for the university students who are there, and then the time period that comes after that, and then in the future, it's interesting because we've got 3 issues pretty much in the can at this point, but there have been some surprises as we've written the story, as we talked the story out, where I thought that things that would have happened in a later issue happened a little bit sooner, and that sometimes happens when you're planning out a story. Because what I like to do is outline everything in advance. I had 6 issues outlined completely before I started writing, but when you start writing and you get to know the story and the characters, you start moving things around, and you start condensing things in one place and then expanding them in another. So it can be hard to put a number on the issues or the pages, or even the exact timeline until it's right near the end and you know exactly how it's going to wrap up. Because even if I conceptually know the full outline of the story and what happens at the end, how you get there can change during the writing process, especially since we're working with a great editor, Sebastian Gurner. I mentioned him earlier. He's been really helpful in terms of just having great ideas about how things could work, how things could be expanded. And then even Joe, as he draws these characters and he gets to know them, he has ideas for them too. And he'll come to me with, hey, what if we change this scene? Or what if we take 3 panels and make them one? Or what if we put this scene in another issue? And it's awesome to be able to access someone else's perspective. It's a super valuable thing whenever you're creating something, because you can really get in your own head about how a story is going to unfold, and you think you have it all planned out, and then someone else says, hey, but wouldn't it be cool if it did this? And you're like, damn it, it would be cool. Like you're so right. And then you have to make a bunch of changes. But that's always for the better, I think.
But it's also comics, because in comics it's easier to make changes versus in a movie, a
Yes.
television show, because it's cheaper. I mean, the cheapest
Yes.
form of producing anything is a book, is a novel.
For
By
sure.
far, all you need is a word processor and some electricity. Comics are pretty cheap, all things considering. Not super cheap, but still cheaper than an animation show.
Yes.
And making a full blown movie like the Avengers, well, God help you, you better have Disney behind you. But all jokes aside, I mean, making those changes is easier. And the reason why I asked the question is that I'm sure certain people when they hear this are gonna have the question saying, "Hey, are we gonna see the consequences unfold after this conversation to Michelle and Josie that pursue weeks after? Or is it that they have the conversation and then everything falls out?" Because that's what people I think are super interested in is what happened in the 90s, that conversation, what happened in that conversation, and then what's the after effects? Because do these group of friends become closer? Do they reconcile? Do they have differences of opinions? Does Michelle realize that some of these people are bad people? Does she realize that some of these people thought she thought were bad are actually good, we're doing the right thing? Or is it that this whole thing just dissipates the whole friendship or unites them even closer? And so that's really where the story gets super interesting because there's three components that have me interested in now.
Yeah,
And
that's
hopefully
that.
I'm summarizing this really well. That's and I don't know which way it's going.
No, but I mean, there are definite consequences to that detox session that Michelle has. I mean, that's really the hinge of the story. That's the kicking off point for everything that happens after that. And there's a lot that's going to happen post that session where she comes out of that franchise and has to dramatically rethink a whole bunch of things in her life and then make sure that the people who were involved in something that she thought she understood realize that what they also understood is completely it's going to get blown open for them, you know. And part of the story looks at what that's like when you're an adult and you have this, you know, you've been living you built a life for yourself, and then when someone reveals something from your past to be not what you thought it was, like what effect does that have on your life? Not just yourself, but you know the decisions you made to that point, and how you relate to other people, whether they're friends from the past or friends from the present, you know. And are you able to maintain those relationships when new stresses like this when they appear? So there's really so much fun character stuff that I get to do, and I'm super excited that I'm writing it. It's really hard to not just put it all out in the world immediately. You know, like serializing it is a huge act of restraint.
So let's actually talk about this because I think that you're serializing it and releasing it in issues for a few reasons. I think the main one is money because producing comics and cash flow in comics is very complicated. You know, that's the biggest issue with the business in general is cash flow. I don't think I'm saying anything controversial. If I am,
No,
to shut
not
up at any
not at
given point.
all.
I
You're
will
completely
concede
right.
ground. More than happy to on that point. But I think that's the reason why, because I think if you had all the money in the world, you would release this thing either as a graphic novel or all 7 issues at once, and you'd want to tell the story. I think most people in comics want to tell their story as fast as humanly possible. If I'm wrong, just tell me I'm wrong, and I'm more than happy
No,
to.
I think you're definitely right about the financial aspect because, like you said, comics are more affordable than movies, but that's a pretty big gap. So it's being able to serializing it does make it easier for us to finance the art, the production, the printing, and whatnot. But there's another aspect to serialization that is, I think, unique to crowdfunding versus the direct market, and that's you get to build an audience over time. And let's say I had everything done right now. I had a full graphic novel ready to go, and I put it out on Kickstarter. I think that the audience it would reach in this moment versus 2 years from now, when I've been building up an audience over a number of issues, would be a lot smaller. Because you can bring people into the story slowly over time. They tell their friends tell their friends. And then by the time you get to the final issue and you have a complete story that's ready to be discovered, there are more people who are going to read it. And it's kind of the opposite of the direct market where, you know, you release an issue number one, it gets a lot of attention, and then follow on issues don't nearly sell as many, or you don't have nearly as many readers. So that's one of the cool things that I appreciate about Kickstarter and crowdfunding in general is like that slow build up is really a valuable thing both in terms of audience and finances.
So let's actually talk about that because I actually think it's good and bad. I think it's a double-edged sword in a lot of ways. Because my issue with crowdfunding, and we've discovered this in the last, I think, 4 years as a community, is there were professionals in the industry There are people who are trying to become professionals and have slowly gone that way. There are people who have gone the opposite way, and there are people who are hobbyists. And so it is very hard for me, and I interview a lot of people to vet who is here for the long haul, who is going to stick around, who is going to try to do an issue one, and then they get it out issue one, issue two, and issue three out over the course of 3 years versus doing it every 3, 4 months.
Mm.
And that's my biggest problem with crowdfunding right now is that you can't get me my content fast enough. Where if somebody gets me 3 issues a year, that's really good. If somebody gets me 2 issues a year, that's really good. People who are getting me an issue a year is rough because
It
I
is rough.
don't want to be in a 7 issue series with you for 7 fucking years. No offense, everybody. If you're doing 7 issues, you got to get me out in 2 years. Or like,
I hear you. So personally, I'm not a big single issues person in general. I support them on Kickstarter because I understand how it works and all the things we just talked about. But when I buy, I primarily buy trades because I like to have the story all at once. So I think that in building an audience that is going to be with you for the long haul in crowdfunding, it's a deal that you're making with them where you say, I am going to do everything I can to get you this story in a timely manner. I am going to respect your interest in my story. I'm not going to play with it. I'm not going to push the limits. I'm going to do 2 or 3 of these a year, and I'm going to stay consistent with it. You can expect a book from me every 4 months, every 5 months. You have to make that bargain with your readers, and you have to respect them. When we did our first book, Code 45, we had a publishing contract with Scout, and we only came to crowdfunding after we had that contract signed. And it was an interesting exercise because not only did we have a deal with the people who were supporting us, but we had a deal with Scout where we wanted to get the book out to them in a reasonable amount of time. They were very good about understanding that crowdfunding takes a while, and it was in the middle. We launched our first campaign 2 weeks before the COVID lockdowns, so there was a lot going on that kind of acted as a barrier in some ways to getting the book out. But it was also a great way to learn about what's possible and what's not on crowdfunding and how long it actually takes to get things done. And all of those lessons, we got 5 issues done of Code 45. They're all out on the direct market right now. You can walk into a comic book store and order them. All our supporters have their copies, and there's going to be a trade coming out in December from Simon and Schuster. And all the lessons that got us to that point, that's what we're applying to Dead Air. We're having a first book, I think, makes the second book just a lot easier logistically, and you're a lot more realistic about your planning and what you can get done, and not having the pressure of an independent or a third party publishing contract right now is also great because we can stay on our own schedule and we can match that schedule to our supporters.
yeah, you mentioned a lot of stuff.
Yeah, sorry.
Right
Kind
there.
of just rambling.
One of the things I want to touch upon, and this is a real issue I feel, is the covenant and the contract between backer and Kickstarter producer, for lack of a better word. I'm sure somebody can come up with a better term for it. Comic creator, writer, whatever you want to call it. But I, as a backer, feel I am entitled to what you are going to give me as a reward. I
Yes.
feel I'm entitled to a reasonable expectation when the book will come. And I think we're discovering that a lot of people sometimes meet that, and sometimes people don't meet that. And I think it's becoming a bigger issue right now in comics, where I have been sort of screwed over on a bunch of projects, and I feel the contract has been broken.
Mhm.
And Kickstarter doesn't give much of a recourse for that.
They really don't.
And I think the comic community has actually defended a bunch of people who they shouldn't have defended. And I think it's up to people like me and a bunch of other people to call out BS on it. And I hope, and I'm a capitalist and I'm a free market guy, and I'm hoping the free market solves that problem because I think that's one of the biggest issues. Because when I got burned the first time I Kickstarter, I didn't come back for 8 months.
Yeah, that's a real concern. That affects every single person who's using crowdfunding. Like every creator who uses crowdfunding is facing a group of people like yourself who've been burned by projects that didn't pan out. And you're right to point out that Kickstarter does not have a mechanism in place that really deals with any of that. Something I think about a lot is someone once said to me that every comic book is a small business. And that's true in the sense that,
I'm a small business. I'm a big small business on eBay. I mean, I'm having a crazy year on eBay, and I'm a small business. And when somebody doesn't pay my bill on eBay, and it might be $100, it hurts, it stings
Yep.
pretty bad.
It has consequences. And I'm lucky because I've been an entrepreneur for almost 20 years now. I've been a freelance writer professionally for 15 of that. And I've been working for myself. So I have a business background and I understand what it's like to not get paid. And I understand what it's like to have to chase down checks and publications and whatnot. And I don't ever want to put someone on the other side of that. And when I the feeling that I could let someone down from something that I've created, that's there's a huge motivation for that to never happen. And there's a huge motivation for things to not be late, let alone not get fulfilled. Like for me, there's no option to not do this book. This book, and part of that for me, before I start a Kickstarter campaign, everyone's paid. Everyone gets their deposits, and I have the cash waiting to fulfill everyone's contract that I've signed on as a contributor, whether it's the letter, colorist, artist, all of that. And then I recoup that through Kickstarter. But even if I don't recoup it fully, everyone still gets paid because that's important to me. And if I was on the other side, I would want to deal with someone who had my best interests in mind. So I maybe approach Kickstarter a little differently because of the business background that I have and because of the writing background that I have. But I take that covenant very seriously, and it's not just with the supporters on Kickstarter; it's also with all of my collaborators.
Yeah, no, I think it's an issue. I just had a Kickstarter where the goal and my reward was changed without my permission.
Oh wow!
That's a problem. That's not a violation of the contract. That is a complete breaking of the contract.
So they actually changed the final goal of the project?
Sort of. The short version of this is that the artists ran away with the money, and so they basically said, "We're going to launch a new campaign, and all my legacy backers are not going to get a graphic novel. They're going to get 3 floppies. So they're going to get floppy of issue 1, floppy of issue 2, and floppy of issue 3." And my response to that is, I ordered a graphic novel and I paid for it. So you're putting massive risk on me that these campaigns are going to be successful. You're not charging me necessarily for those 3 extra floppies, but I didn't order a floppy. If I wanted a floppy, I would have ordered a floppy.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
And that is where I think Kickstarter needs to say, no, 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 you can't do that. That's not how this works. You either have to refund your backers their money, or you have to figure out how to get them their reward, or you should not be on Kickstarter. And person has raised like $50,000 on other projects, and that's where I get upset. That's where I get really pissed off. Where I think that is the biggest violation.
Yeah, no,
And
I would be upset as well. I mean, when you have a platform like Kickstarter, you have people who have like I'd never done a comic book before, and before my first campaign the comic book was finished and ready to go, but it was my first time, right? So there's people like me in that instance. There's people like me now who've done it for a few years and have a good idea of what's possible and what's not. There's professional organizations like independent publishers that are showing up more and more and using it to do pre-orders. And then there's people who you pointed out are hobbyists. Maybe hobbyist is a term that I think it's pretty all encompassing. There are some people who want to tell a story and have a good story to tell, but don't understand how to get it out into the world. And they turn to Kickstarter. And I think that it can be really overwhelming in the sense that there's not necessarily a lot of support for the business side of it if you don't have that kind of experience. So there's such a wide range of people using this one platform. So when you tell someone, I'm getting a comic book on Kickstarter, it can mean anything. It can mean almost anything, And that affects not just the quality, quality is a subjective term, but the quality of what you're getting, but also how it's getting to you, how it's being delivered to you, and how long it takes.
I'll throw another thing that you'll appreciate this as an entrepreneur. What are people to you? And I'm asking you a weird question, and I know exactly how the question sounds. I'm hoping you're going to answer it the right way. But what are people to you?
I don't like within the context of Kickstarter.
In the context of being an entrepreneur and running a business.
I mean, so as a freelancer, people are my audience. They're the people who are.
I'll ask the question in a different way.
Okay.
Your team, right, that does this book,
yes,
is consisted of people.
Yes.
What are those people to you by definition? What is your artist to you?
Partners.
By definition?
They're
I
partners.
mean, he's a resource, right? Is that a fair assumption?
No,
Where
because in this case, we're all co-creators. We're all 50% partners on the book. So
so let me get to my point then really
okay,
quickly.
okay.
The point I'm getting to is that I work at a company. I have a day job. I am a resource to that company and I'm a valuable resource to that company. Somebody else who works in editing or copy editing is a resource. They provide a skill and they provide a valuable piece that makes the company work and makes the company profitable. So when you talk about Kickstarter and you talk about quality, you could also be getting a decent human being, or you could be getting a horrible human being. And so it's not even so much anymore. And the reason why I say people, I relate them to resources, is you could have good resources and you could have really bad resources by definition. And so when you're on Kickstarter, you could have somebody who is a complete asshole on Kickstarter and doesn't care, or you have somebody who is the nicest human being, and sure they're late by 4 months, but you know you're going to get your book, and they're nice about it, and they're updating, and they're punctual, and they're very professional, and like, hey, I'm so sorry, this is my first book. I had a month delay with the shipping. You're going to get your book. They pack it, put a little nice post-it note in there, or you have somebody who says 6 months later, I don't care.
I
Deal with
think
it.
I feel like what you're describing is community, straight up community. You know, it's there are people who are, as you described, they're engaging with their audience and their supporters, and they are with them every step of the way, and they make them feel like they are with them. They don't disappear, even though something's late. They don't hide from the responsibility that they played in the delays or whatever is happening to make the project stumble. And then you have people who don't care about community whatsoever, and they approach Kickstarter as a piggy bank, and they feel no responsibility to the community at large. And we were talking earlier about how bad actors on Kickstarter affect everybody in the sense that it hurts creators because it makes people less likely to support your campaign regardless of your own track record because they've been burned in the past. And I think that these bad actors are people who are hurting a community in that sense because Kickstarter is largely a trust-based community. And it's like you think about like the early days of eBay, like I mean I'm gonna go back to like the
I'm an
two.
eBay seller. I'm
Yeah.
an eBay seller. So I'll briefly explain. I right now have a book that I'm waiting for, and I was speaking to a customer that just bought a book. I said, "Hey, dude, how do you want to handle this? Do you want me to ship out your book, but I'm gonna have to charge you shipping?" He's like, "Yo, dude, relax. I know you're gonna send me all three books, and you save me $26. Don't worry about it. I can wait a month till that book comes in because I trust it." At this point, this guy has bought 6 books from me before he knows that he's gonna get his items.
Yeah.
But back in the day, you had to trust that somebody was going to send you your Rolex watch if you
Yep.
bought it, or your baseball card, or your Pokemon card. I mean, I remember the early days of eBay. I bought Pokemon cards off of eBay
And
on
you're
my
sending
parents'
sending
account.
money orders too, like the untraceable forms of payment sometimes. And it was
Oh, I don't go that far. I was using PayPal back in the day, so I was fortunate enough that I was with PayPal, buying some cool, fun Pokemon cards. But I get the point.
yeah, it's I you're not the first person who's talked to me about this even this week. The idea of what Kickstarter could do to support the community better in terms of identifying bad actors, in terms of not allowing people to walk away on both sides of the equation. Like we had some, I mean, 99.9% of backers of my projects have been great. And then there are some people who are unusual in what they do when they communicate with you or how they interact with your project. We've on our very first Kickstarter, we had someone who made disruptively large pledges, like $1,000 at a time, and then canceled them 5 days later, and then made that pledge again 2 days after that, and was constantly sending us messages, and it was really strange, and we didn't know how to deal with it, and it can disrupt like you don't really know what's going to happen with your own campaign because it's really disruptive to how the funding is going, right? But Kickstarter had no way to deal with that. There was nothing on their side. Like as a creator, there's nothing I can do to stop that
There
from
is
happening.
something. They actually added something. I don't know if you know
They
this.
did. I saw it this week. There's a new. You can remove people from. You can remove their pledges from your campaign, and that's very new. Is that what you were referring to?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
but I have an issue with that personally because there's unfortunately in the comic community people don't like each other.
Mm.
So what happens now is, let's say you hate me. I don't think you do, but I backed your campaign. And you say, I hate Andrew. And I'm excited, and you remove me from that pledge. I'll get my money back, but now I can't back you. But I did nothing to you. You just say, I don't like people named Andrew.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, you don't know me personally, or you think I'm somebody else, right? How does that, how does Kickstarter deal with that? If I'm making a $20 pledge, I'm not going to cancel it. I'm not doing anything. I don't know you at all. I'm like, this book looks cool. Sounds interesting. You sold me, and then you remove me. Or
Yeah.
let's say you were trying to move the person below me, and then you remove me. What happens then?
I
So
feel like it almost seems like this should be Kickstarter's responsibility instead of the individual creator's responsibility, and that they should have some type of, I don't know, I wouldn't use the word moderation, but some type of community policies that are applied across the board might be a good solution. I honestly don't know what the best answer is because it's a complicated issue. Kickstarter doesn't, I feel like how they approach the idea of being a marketplace is they're a little hands off. They don't necessarily like that term. And I think maybe community is something they would be more into buying into from a dealing with edge cases and weird situations. But it's, we're getting to the point where I think Kickstarter is starting to become a mature community, and people generally know what they should and shouldn't expect from both creators and backers. And it might be time to act on that for Kickstarter to kind of codify. I don't know if you want to call it like a code of behavior or just um, a rule set that allows people to be on the same terms when they're dealing with a campaign.
I have a solution for Kickstarter, and it's very simple. It's very similar to eBay, where I think that if you are a repeat offender and you get caught, you get a strike. And maybe what happens is that you get your account from pledging or running a campaign for a week where you can't do anything on Kickstarter for a week. And then the second time it happens, it's maybe 14 days. And then after that, let's say you don't do anything for 6 months and something happens and it's a weird thing, there's discretion that could be involved because things happen in life without a doubt.
For
You
sure.
pledge $20 and then something happens in your family, you can't afford the book. That's okay. Things happen. That's not erratic.
No,
When
of
you're
course.
doing
And anyone, honestly, anyone canceling any pledge, it's totally valid. I have no issue with that. For me, it's strange behaviors like repeat pledging and repeat canceling over and over and over. Stuff that I think I don't understand why it's happening. And sometimes, there's a lot of spam on Kickstarter too. And we've even on this campaign recently, we had people make somewhat sizable pledges and then make an overture to us and be like, oh, hey, you want to buy our services for your campaign? And then if you ignore them or if you answer in the negative, their pledge evaporates. And that's their prerogative to do that. But I don't think Kickstarter really wants to create a world where pledge gives you access to selling spam to creators. Like it's there are reasons to cancel a pledge, and there are reasons where I think people are just taking advantage of access to a creator to sell something, and I don't think that's where Kickstarter wants to be.
it's interesting. So I'm a strong believer in there's two paths to getting whatever you want in life. There's earning your way in and buying your way in. No. But hear me out. You laugh at me. I think you know where I'm going with this. So you could buy an ad on a show if you need media, right? If you can't earn your way onto that show,
Yeah.
is the idea. So you could say, hey, look, I'd like to run an ad on your show, blah, 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 great. And maybe some people feel more comfortable doing that because they're like, I think my ad can sell better than me talking about my product.
For sure.
Or you can earn your way in. And so I do both. Like I've bought media ads and I bought media spots, and then I've also earned my way in. And there's nothing wrong with either. If you're running a Facebook ad, you're buying your way in.
Yes.
If you do an interview, you're earning your way in. So I think that's what they're trying to do, but I don't think Kickstarter is really too happy about that because it's not good. I mean, I ran a Kickstarter and I got all those messages, and I was like, I don't really need your services. I'm good.
Yeah. Send me all the messages you want, I guess, but for me, it's like, don't make a pledge unless you want to support the book. Like that's, I think, where I draw the line. It's if you're into this, if you're into our book and you want to be part of the audience, you want to read it, that's great. And if you're in that audience and you want to pitch me something and you still want to read the book, I'll listen to your pitch. I'm totally fine with that. But if you're just kind of mercenary style pitching me $100 to get my attention and then being like, hey, do you want me to promote your book here for another $100? And I'm not into it and you just bounce, That's not so great. You know, like that's it's there are other ways you could have sent me an email. You know what I mean? It's there are better ways to do it, I think.
I just think they're trying to buy attention and trying to get
Yeah.
your thing. And look, I'll be the first person to say this where I pledge to people's campaigns for $1. I'm like, hey, I got this show, look that number. I'm not selling you to be on my show. But I figured if I throw you a buck, you're gonna at least read my email. But I'm not gonna take my dollar away.
Yeah, see that's the thing. I think that's the nice part of it. You know, like there's a difference between that and someone being like, here's a C note and oh sorry. Because it's disruptive from when you're planning, you know, like if you do your best to plan your promotion and you try to figure out what's working and what's not and what's attracting the attention of people and what's keeping their attention when they get to your Kickstarter page. And I don't claim to have the answers. I think it's something that changes all the time, and I think it's a constant conversation you're having with an audience of people who want to read your book. Like, what's really interesting is we had a pretty good audience for Code 45. We did. I was really happy with our Kickstarters, and people were great. I didn't know how many of those people would come back, you know, a year and a half later for Dead Air, which is a different story. It's got some similar elements, but it's honestly a different story. You know, it's same artist, same designer, same writer, but that doesn't necessarily mean people are going to want to read it.
I mean, it's a different time, different things going on,
Yeah,
different
very
projects
true.
going on. I
Very true.
mean, this is my thing. I'm curious about Kickstarter. Is what determines a Kickstarter and the success of a Kickstarter is the track record of the creator, if they have other stories out there, because that helps. The artists on the team, variants help. Also, what time you're launching, price point, and what else is on Kickstarter. I think those 6 things really determine the success or failure of a Kickstarter right
Yeah.
now.
And
Because
those things, you can only control some of them, right? Like as a creator, like you can't control what else is out there. You can't necessarily control what happens while your Kickstarter is going on, like economically. Like I said, like 2 weeks into my first Kickstarter, we were locked down on COVID, right? And I saw that third week, we had funded, but I saw that third week evaporate. It was just gone. We had absolutely no real interest. And then in the fourth week, it came back. But what was interesting was 2 months later, we did the Kickstarter for the second issue of the same book. And COVID is still happening. People don't know what's going to happen to their livelihoods, their health. There's a lot of concern. It was a really stressful time. And we had a much, much better Kickstarter because I think what happened was a lot of people stayed off of Kickstarter in terms of creating projects. And so the people who pushed forward with their projects like us, maybe there was a little bit more of a playing field. Maybe it was easier to get people's attention. And I think people wanted to be distracted from what was happening around them. So you can't plan for that. You can't predict that. Like you can control your artist that you collaborate. You can control what you're offering and your price point. But the other things you have to kind of let go.
right now, I'm big into the stock market, I'm big into the economy, and right now, I feel there is positive sentiment where that could change in 6 months from now, it could change in 3 weeks from now,
Yeah.
but it definitely seems like we're on a bull run. It might be a fake bull run, but that also changes how people buy things, what they buy. And I'm
Yeah.
in an eBay business selling comics, and I've been through this where when people feel like they're richer, they feel they could spend more money on books and they're willing to buy more books.
For sure.
When people feel money is tighter or things are going on, there's retraction there. And so that's something that is so interesting where I think it's similar with Kickstarter. If you feel we're about to go into a bear market and the stock market's about to collapse and your 401k is not doing good and your house is going to lose $200,000 in value, you might want to sit a few rounds out.
Yeah, I mean, and that's not only is that like put you in a bad financial situation, but the stress of all of that happening simultaneously, it really pulls your focus away from things like a Kickstarter campaign. You know, like you're not necessarily going to Kickstarter and saying like, "Oh, I wonder what cool books are out there right now." You're kind of just like sitting in your office and hoping your life doesn't implode.
You're hoping you keep your job.
Yeah, yeah. The more important aspects of your life start to come into sharper focus, I think is how that works.
And I also think you get a different client too, because the people who are stable, remain and you figure out who your core clients are. And then also you figure out your business. There's a lot of stuff that goes on, but
Yeah.
Kickstarter is the Wild West. And then you have another added issue on your campaign where you're Canadian. And I don't say you being a Canadian is the problem. I say that shipping is the problem.
Well, so fortunately, as a Canadian, shipping is not an issue for me to the United States. It's an issue for me in Canada domestically. Your postal service is infinitely cheaper than ours because we have a gigantic country where nobody lives. And what I mean by that is our population density, almost everyone lives in like one of three cities. And if you live outside of those, yeah, Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, Calgary is somewhat in the same league in terms of size, but that's it. Like imagine if everyone in the United States lived in New York, LA, and Houston. Like it would be kind of like that idea. And so postal costs to get to more rural parts of the country or smaller cities are very high. But for the United States, you have such a population. It's spread out much more evenly. I mean, there are areas that are emptier than others, obviously, like Maine, Alaska, Montana. It's a little less dense, but in general, postal costs are much more affordable. And there's a service in Canada that it's called Chit Chats. And what they do is every day they fill an 18-wheeler full of mail, they drive it across the border into the United States, and then they mail it using US domestic rates. So I pay a quarter per package to take advantage of that service, and it's cheaper for me to mail from using that from Montreal to Los Angeles than it is for me to mail from Montreal to Toronto, which is a 5-hour drive. It's crazy. So I'm really lucky in that sense because I know in the United States, mailing internationally is a boondoggle. Like right now, I see Kickstarters that if I want a book to Canada, like a single comic book, it's like $25 in shipping. I can charge like 5, 6 US to an American who it wants to support our Kickstarter. I'm really lucky that way. But in Canada, like that same shipping, it could be triple that to go half the distance.
See, I don't ship. I ran a Kickstarter for this show, but eventually I'm going to do a comic, and I'm not going to ship internationally. And what I'm going to say to all my international backers is I'm going to say, look, shoot me a message. I'll put it up on my eBay store. You can pay the eBay shipping thing to the eBay international program, and
That's a great way to do it.
it'll be cheaper than everything else, and it'll work out for everybody. If you live in some weird country like the Congo in Africa, I don't know what that looks like, but if that's the case, we'll figure something out. But if you live in the UK, you live in Canada, it's cheaper that way for everybody, and it's easier for me because I don't get destroyed, you don't get destroyed, and
Yeah.
everybody's gonna be happy.
It's we were I'm lucky in my bad luck in terms of Canadian shipping because it's been a problem for so long domestically that there's been a lot of companies that have kind of stepped up to deal with it. They're like, okay, we got to figure out. In the US, there's less pressure because USPS is so good. I mean, I know it seems like it's crap sometimes, but trust me, compared to what we deal with here, it's a pretty well-oiled machine. So we have I would say about 20-25% of our backers are outside of North America, just generally across all of our campaigns. And I've been able to find shipping companies that work pretty well, getting stuff to the UK, getting stuff to mainland continental Europe. Even we have a decent number of supporters in Australia and in Asia as well. And there's a couple of countries I know every time I see that I have a supporter from that I'm going to have to work a little harder and it's going to be a little more expensive. But in general, it's been okay. And our shipping prices for international, well, outside of North America kind of reflect that. So I've been fortunate with that. But what I really miss and what I would really love if Canada had that you guys have is media mail. We'd have nothing like that here, and it would be a game changer for comic books.
Yeah, I don't even know if I ship media mail all my books. But then again, when I'm dealing with $60 books, I'm not interested in shipping media
Yeah,
mail.
you want tracking, you want it. I'm the same way. It's like there are some very cheap ways to ship in Canada, but I'm scared to use them because it's like throwing a book into the void, right? You don't know what's going to happen.
I sell a lot of cards, and I don't have a problem legitly putting a card in a top loader and then no tracking. I'm going to just send it off and hope for the best. But when you're selling a $12 card, it's a little bit different. If I was selling a $400 card, oh my God, am I packing that thing up in a vault?
For sure. And it's a relationship too, right? Like we were talking about relationship, Kickstarter supporters getting your book out in time, but when you ship something to someone, that's part of that relationship and that trust. They trust that not only will you pick an option that actually gets it there, but it's going to get it there undamaged and that you're going to take care while you package it to make sure you did whatever you could to head off whatever crazy stuff's going to happen en route, right? So that's part of the whole covenant as well, I think.
There's a reason why people pay $13, $14 shipping.
Yeah.
And people sometimes yell at me on eBay if we're saying your shipping's too high. You can ship this book for $9. I'm like, no, I cannot. And that's the end of the discussion. And then when I'm shipping now 25 cards, I charge $4 shipping and nobody balks. Nobody balks because they know those cards are going to arrive perfectly. They know that they're going to be shipped out on time when they arrive, and they know they're going to get their product correctly. And people who spend money on these items, and I think, people who back Kickstarters are looking for higher quality items and rare items and exclusive items, are willing to pay for it.
For
I'm willing
sure.
to pay $10 for shipping on a Kickstarter. No questions asked.
Yep. And there's no worse feeling than getting that package that you've been waiting for like 2 months, 6 months, 8 months, opening it up and it's damaged. Like it takes all the wind out of your sails, and you're still excited and you still want to read it, but at the same time you're like, man, I wish this hadn't gotten folded in half. I wish this corner hadn't got dog-eared. It's like it just sucks. And you can, I mean, not to speak ill of projects I've supported, but you can always tell who cares about getting that to me and who just puts it in a bubble envelope with no backing and
Oh
hopes for the
man,
best.
I hate people doing that. I will say one thing though, that Pat Shan ships really well. He ships really well. He put ants in my package.
Ants.
So he doesn't know this story. It's a funny story. He did this. No. I don't want to speak ill of Pat because I love Pat. What happened is that apparently, I guess some ants got into a crevice of that. So I'm opening it up, and you could just imagine my surprise. I'm opening up the book. I'm so excited, and something moves. I'm like, what the fuck? And I jumped 15 feet in the air, because I had an ant infestation in my room once, and
Oh
it
man.
freaked me out.
Yeah,
It was
that's
like,
I can't imagine. It's like no one expects bonus ants when they're opening a package.
you're opening it and then you see something moving. You're like, what the fuck? Oh, it was it. I never told Pat that. At some point, I will tell him that story. Obviously, he didn't put them in there, but apparently they
No.
just got in because it was just put on the front step. And I guess, it's summertime, and oh my God, I almost had a heart attack. I almost had a heart attack. But that's how you know somebody really cares. That's going above and beyond, guys, above and beyond. Um, but no. That's how you know. So if somebody puts ants in your Kickstarter package, you know that they went the extra mile just for you. Um, so when I run my next campaign, guys, if you get ants in your package, knowing it comes from love and not
It's special. Yeah, that's the special touch.
if you don't get any ants, you're on my list. But I agree. I agree. All jokes aside, I agree that I've gotten books, and I'm amazed that they arrive perfectly in like a cardboard sleeve, and I'm like, I mean, they had a bag of board in it, but I was like, this is not good. This was a recipe for disaster. I paid $10 shipping. They shipped it for like $3.79, and I'm like, why?
Yeah, it's we worked hard to try and figure out when we were first starting which mailers would work well. We used the Gemini stuff, which works really well for some items, but then you end up if you have like an art print or something that's too big for a Gemini, we ended because they're restricted to comic book size. If you have like an 8.5 by 10, 8 by 10 or 11-inch print, you can't use that. So we started using. We had some Gator Pack mailers that were really rigid that we had great luck with. And when you combine like a Gator Pack with a bagged and boarded book, bagged and boarded graphic novel, we discovered that they were almost unkillable. And we got lucked out. I think we sent probably 1,000 packages in the last 3 years, and I've lost maybe 3 or 4 to damage maximum. And a lot of that was water, where it got left out and rained on. And there's nothing you can do about that. You can bag stuff and like the comics okay, but other stuff that's inside, water's going to take it out. And then we had the weirdest situation was we had a supporter in Germany, and customs basically worked them over really good and ended up sending the package to some warehouse in Switzerland and wouldn't let them take it. And we had to try and get it out of that warehouse. And I ended up just sending them another package because it was easier than dealing with like the Swiss authorities who were super suspicious of like the graphic novel I was sending to Europe. It was a weird situation. But in general, we haven't had a lot of shipping loss. And whenever someone messages us with, hey, something happened in transit, the easiest and best thing to do is you send them another one. You do it the next day, and you preserve that relationship, and you keep them coming back to keep reading your books, because if their books are damaged, they're not going to read the next one. Like it's a simple calculus.
Oh, you're better than me. You're better than me. On eBay, I torture my clients when they do this. But that's because the people who actually send me will take a picture of it. When somebody says, "Oh, my cards were lost in the mail," I've had experiences where they have not been lost in the mail.
Yeah.
And I can tell, depending on somebody's tone and how they respond to me, if they're going to bullshit me or not. And I hate to say it, but I have to be that way because
Yeah,
I've
no,
been.
it's definitely it's like a different kind of community, right? Like, and also what you're selling is a limited resource. Like, you might only have one of those cards or one of those comics, whereas I've got a stack that I printed, and I always print extra, so to take care of these situations, right? So it's for me, it's a lot less stressful, and for the supporter to just send them another one. It's lucky to be able to do that with Kickstarter.
Yeah, no, I'm in a different state and a different state of mind, and also I'm tough. Where if they prove that I got damaged, I'm happy to send them another one, or just refund their money. And you just say, hey, what do you want? Or sometimes half of it, I'll say, look, you want me to refund you half your money? Like, what do you want here?
Yeah.
But because sometimes I do it more than one of them, but I'm tough because they got to prove it. And it be because unfortunately the eBay community and selling comics, it's not the same community
Yeah.
as Kickstarter. And I ran a Kickstarter, so I know that. Um, but I digress. That's actually interesting that your shipping is actually affordable because I've ordered books from Canada before, and it was expensive. It was like
Yeah, I think that
25 bucks.
not everyone's aware of what's out there. I've ordered stuff in Canada and it's been expensive, and I've tried to. So one of the great things about Kickstarter and in eBay too, I'm sure you've come across this. Like, if you encounter someone who's doing something that you're not aware of, I always ask them about it. I'm like, hey, how did you get that shipping rate? Or hey, where did you get these mailers? Or like, hey, like how did you deal with this situation? And small business owners tend to like helping each other out for the most part, and that's been really helpful. But there have been times where ordering stuff off of Kickstarter, but in Canada where we have this high shipping, I would reach out and be like, hey, your shipping's a little high. If you try this, it'll be a lot cheaper for you. And like 90% of the time, people are like, that's awesome. I didn't know about that. Thank you. And then there's the 10% of people who are like, don't tell me how to run my business. You know, they don't want to know a better way to deal with their customers. And at that point, I'm like, you know what? You're right. I'm sorry I said something. Thank you very much. And like, I'm just done with it. But you got to offer that olive branch to try and help someone out wherever you can.
Yeah, no. On eBay, I don't really talk about shipping with people because I ship a certain way that works for me, and I'm sure that there are cheaper ways how to do it. But what's working is working, and I know that my customers get their books perfectly, and so
That's what's important.
I'm not about to change my shipping ways. But also, what I do is that I started talking to a lot of people. I'm like, yo, are you trying to complete a set? And that's how I just sold a bunch of cards where I turned a $12 thing into a $60 sale, just like that.
Yeah.
Because I ask my customer, I say, hey, what are you trying to do here? Because I got a bunch of stuff and I can help you. And usually when I say this, I was like, you got a point there. I need this, and this, and this. And then I say, you need this one too. Like, yeah, I need that one too.
Yep.
And so it's very interesting when you start asking questions to people. But
It's that relationship like we are talking about it. You know, something similar happened to me this week on Kickstarter where I had someone message me and say, "Hey, I'm in Europe. Shipping is really really high. I want to support you, but my question is, it's way easier for me to buy all of them at once. It's way easier for me to wait for the trade. How many issues do you think it's going to be? You know, like what's your plan on this? Because I want to come in on it. I just can't come in on it now." And I totally get that. I totally get that someone doesn't want to spend $20 shipping 7 times. Not everyone can absorb that over the the course of 2 or 3 years. And I welcome people who want to reach out and kind of pick my brain on that and see if there's a way where we can make the book work for them. If maybe they just want to do digital now, but know that 2 years from now, when issue 7 comes out, they're going to grab it all on paper. You know, like there's always ways to work with the people who want to support you.
it's interesting. I'll throw this out there. I right now, as I was stating, I have a customer who bought a book that I'm waiting on. And he bought another book, and I said, "Look, I'll combine the shipping. I'll waive the $13 because shipping 2 books in Gemini is easy." Then he wanted another book, and so I had to reach out to him. He said, "Yeah, I'll wait again because I know you're going to get me your book." So now I'm saving him $26
Yeah.
in shipping.
And it's
And I'm like,
communication. It's just straight up communication, right?
and so he's bought stuff from me before. He knows the books are going to arrive perfectly. He knows that I'm going to ship out the second I get it. I'm like, hey man, I'm getting killed here too. I'm not happy about this. And he knows I'm not happy about it. That yeah, I am waiting for this book because I don't want this book in my collection. I mean, I want it in my collection. I bought two. I'm selling one of them and I'm going to keep the other. But I want him to have his books.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the important thing.
And so I have no problem having open tabs with people on eBay. If they pay and they're like, yo, I'm going to be ordering 5 books from you in the next year or the next 2 months, can we just leave this as an open tab and you'll come out and shipping? I'm like, yeah, I've done that for people because it works. And honestly, if I knew I was running 2 or 3 Kickstarters back to back, I might do that. And I don't know if it's quote unquote legal, but if I was, one of these people on Kickstarter running, monthly Kickstarters, I would, and I had international backers, I would figure out a way how to come out and ship it.
Yeah, you want to try and meet people where they are, in terms of, they've already, the fact that someone's reached out indicates that they are motivated to support you in the first place, right? And if you can work out a way for that to happen, that's best for everybody. Being super rigid about how you manage the Kickstarter, or how you manage your shipping, I mean, I don't necessarily see that as a benefit. Definitely have some ground rules, definitely have expectations, but don't open yourself up to alternate solutions, open yourself up to being flexible.
No, I agree. I agree. I mean, what I don't know about you, but you probably know more about Kickstarter than I do. I don't think there's many rules on Kickstarter,
No,
really,
it's really, as we were talking about earlier, it's a trust-based community, and almost everything flows from that philosophy.
because I know there's a lot of rules on eBay, and I've
Yes.
learned the hard way. I've learned the hard way.
Yeah.
I'll give some of them right now. You cannot put the word boobs in your eBay title. You cannot put the word nude in your eBay title. If you put those 2 words in, you will get a warning. If you put it again in, you will get another warning. And if you do it a third time, you will get your account suspended for 3 days. I know because it just happened. It doesn't matter what the picture is. The picture can be completely nude. They don't care. They just don't like the word.
That's so weird.
It triggers an AI and a search in their system that then says this person is selling something that goes against our community standards. And that's what it goes down to.
Fair enough. Yeah, yeah.
So if you're selling paint that's nude paint, it will trigger it, which is insane.
Yeah, or like there's so many, like, that's for fabric for clothing. That's a very common term that's used too. Or even if you think about it, like, on a comic book cover, a naked cover with no trade dress on it. That's not an uncommon thing to sell, and that would probably trigger it as well.
So you have to use the word virgin. Virgin does not trigger it. It doesn't. You could say virgin dressing, you can put virgin cover, doesn't trigger it.
Yeah.
You put nude cover, it's going to trigger it. It's crazy. But I digress because we should talk about your rewards,
Sure.
as I am having an echo throughout the entire interview. I don't know why it's doing this. I don't know why, but I gave up a long time ago. But I know you have a bunch of stuff. You have the digital with layouts and script. I know you
Yes.
have the print and digital, which is I think this one right here.
Yes.
It's got kind of a Walking Dead vibe to it. Um, a little bit.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that.
I kind of like it. I kind of like it. And then I think you got some other stuff too, where you have the print and swag bag. You have the
Yeah.
sign and swag and print
So we
thing. I
got
think
we got a lot of stickers. We tried to put together the swag bag is like kind of like if you were in the 90s and a radio station was promoting itself, we have like the poster for the radio show. We have some like stickers, like a mixtape sticker, headphones, a microphone. We had our designer, Angela Hodge. She's actually a product designer for I mean a lot of companies, and she designed and 3D modeled and then printed out these, try to get that in front of the camera, these mixtape charms. And she used like an iridescent type of filament. So it's like keep moving the wrong way. There's 25 of them, and the color gradient changes depending on which one you pick up. And so that we thought that was a fun thing to put in. It's like very era specific. And Joe also is doing character sketches where he'll hand sketch characters from the book, kind of a one-off thing. And we have our original art pages as well. Those went very quickly. And he basically spent a week and large format Bristol board and traditionally inked and penciled out 2 of the pages for the book, and then he scans them in and we create them digitally. But they're really gorgeous. He's a very detail oriented artist, and I'm really happy with how those came out. So we try to provide a range of rewards for people who, some people, like we were talking about, they don't want to pay shipping, or not that they don't want to, but it's not in their budget. So we try to make the digital stuff as fun for them as possible. There's people who just want the book and just want to read it and aren't interested in any other kind of stuff. And then there's people who are they like the idea of grabbing stuff from the 90s, like in era type of rewards. And those are fun for us to make and to talk about and whatnot. So we try to include that as well. So it's kind of a whole range of stuff.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and Kickstarter is a very, very interesting piece with rewards, and it's tricky because you never know what's going to hit.
No, it's you can try to rely on stuff that's worked in the past, but like this time around we've had a lot of digital supporters, and we've had a lot of people who were interested in the layout and the script. And that was something that we never offered layout before with Code 45. We'd offered script and we had a little bit of interest, but this time it's really strong. And actually people reached out directly and said, hey, I would love it if every creator gave me this kind of look behind the scenes of how things got from the page to the page. Like and it was good to hear that. And it's nice to know that there are people who want to have that peek at the creative process, because it's fun to show them. Because otherwise, Joe and I work really hard on the script and we work really hard on the layout, and no one ever sees it. It's like when you're done with that issue, it goes away, and you might reference it in the future, but you don't put that online. People aren't looking at it, and it's nice to be able to you put effort into something and to be able to show it to people.
That's interesting. I mean, I don't really look at layouts. I like reading scripts because obviously I'm writing my book and it helps.
Yeah, it's
And that
fun. It's neat
does,
to see how people do it. Yeah.
but that's what I enjoy. But I'm not going to look at a layout. But also, a lot of times, I just want to read somebody's book, and I also want it in my collection because there's certain books that are really cool and look awesome, and there's certain perks that look awesome. And I'm a variant collector, so that's how I function. And also, I'll be very honest, I back sometimes for stretch goals, and I'm the worst. It depends. No, seriously, there's people who have awesome stretch goals. Brian
It's true.
Pulido is a good example of that. Guy has a lot of stretch goals. Jamie Tyndall has a bunch of stretch goals a bunch of times. And some of those stretch goals are awesome. And sometimes certain things are cool. Like Tom Hudgenton has done certain books. I mean, there you get a bonus book if you back and they reach a goal. And it's kind of nice to get that book in black and white.
Yeah, it is cool. I had a friend, Dave Cook, who had us. He had his he had made a joke. He had a series called Kiltopia, and he made a joke with his supporters in the middle of the series that, oh, maybe we should offer a Kiltopia toothbrush, like as a stretch goal. And I don't know if it was just because people thought it was funny, but his supporters started harassing him online about, when are we going to get this stretch goal toothbrush? Like, when are we going to get the Kiltopia branded toothbrush? And he eventually, I believe, ended up adding it as a stretch goal in one of his final campaigns, because so many people either thought it was a funny joke or legitimately wanted a toothbrush that was branded from the book that they enjoyed. And like you said, you can never know what's going to hit with people, what people are going to actually want. It just seems so random sometimes.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. And then also, you mentioned something too that I think needs to be mentioned is that having affordable pricing and having different pricing tiers, because as you stated, sometimes people only have $10 or $11, and sometimes people have 100, and also sometimes somebody only has wants to back 5 projects, and if you're $100 to really get anything significant, they might pass or they might only back yours.
Exactly, exactly. You gotta, like I was mentioning before, you have to meet your supporters where their interest lies. You have to meet them where they are, and I think sometimes there's a tendency for creators to maybe look at digital rewards as like the lowest tier and just kind of something for people who maybe don't really have an interest in the book. But I think that's really inaccurate. I think that there are, so like we were talking internationally, so many people internationally, and I do this sometimes too, they want to support that book, they want to make that book happen, and if you give them something cool that's digital, that is affordable, instead of just being like, okay, it's, this is an afterthought. If you make that digital reward interesting, you might not know how much someone's willing to spend to support a digital reward. I think that they shouldn't be afterthoughts. They shouldn't be just the lowest rung on the ladder. You should have a range of interesting stuff digitally that you can offer people who do want to support your project.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. I also think that just having a tier for $10, having a tier for 15, and then having a $50 tier, because again, I think a lot of people feel comfortable supporting 10 or 12 or $15. I think 15 is high. I really do on indie. And I get that it's indie, but I think 15 is a little high for a cover A. But I also understand that $12, I mean, I don't book at $12 for a cover A anymore. 15, I have to question it at 20, and I've spent $20 for a cover A. That's steep. That's really steep. And I think that's the problem that creators also don't understand is I get that you have to balance that you're producing a book, but I also think that you have to say, how do I get somebody in on the lowest tier and then make them a valued buyer and bring them up, $10, and then the next campaign, I can't speak to it, it's 15 or 20, and then they become a $50 person at three or fourth or five campaigns in.
Yeah. You're talking about audience building. That's so important. And I think that that speaks to being able to take a long-term view of your project. Like I know that Dead Air is going to be 6 or 7 issues. I know we're going to have 6 or 7 campaigns minimum. And bringing people along for each of those campaigns is the most important thing. And the thing about that is as you bring them along and as your audience grows, you're going to be able to recoup over time. Like, let's say you don't break even on the first campaign. It's fine because you know by the third campaign, you'll be able to recoup on all the previous ones. It's really, you really need to play a long game when you're developing a book for crowdfunding and when you're trying to build that audience. It's not something where you can just look at each campaign individually. It has to be a cohesive strategy.
Isn't it also the fact that if you do it, and let's say you print 500 copies for Dead Air 1, and then you know that you're going to be for the next 2, 3, possibly 4 years printing anywhere for each campaign. Let's say you're going to print 200 copies of issue 1, right? Because you know you're going to need it. At a certain point, if you calculate how many issues you're going to print, your art costs go down, or they have a zero base cost on the second campaign, and
Yeah,
it becomes significantly cheaper.
exactly. Like, so, it's crazy, but the cost difference between printing 500 copies for me and printing 1,000 copies is only like $400 in some cases, which is really only over the run about a 20% boost, and you're getting double the number of copies. So if you invest in that up front, exactly what you just said, in the next campaign, I'm not printing issue 1 anymore. So I can take that cost, that line item out of my budget. I'm only printing issue 2, but I'm selling both of them. And that's a big help. And it's something we did with the previous Kickstarter with Code 45. We overprinted on issue 1, and it lasted us throughout the entire 3 Kickstarter set that we did. And I'm really glad that we did that, because there was a point where we were like, oh, maybe we should only print the number that we have ordered. But I'm glad that we decided to make the extra investment because it paid off long term.
I buy and sell cards, and if I buy 25 of them, it is $4 a card, and I sell for $10. If I buy 10 of them, it is 50. So for double the money, I'm getting 15 more cards, and my profit margin is significantly higher because I'm going to sell it anyway for $10.
And
If I
you get to keep your prices reasonable over time, right? That strategy means that you're not moving from like, okay, well, I bought this bunch of cards for this, so I have to sell it for X, and then I bought this bunch of cards for this, so I have to sell it for Y. Like, you can
It's
keep things more
it's even
stable.
crazier. It's even crazier for me. My profit margin goes up. It's not even at $5 I sell for 10, and I'm making $1.60. At $4, I'm making $2 a card in profit after I pay myself back and everything, all the fees eBay takes. So because of that, the price doesn't change.
Yeah.
My profit changes, and that's what's awesome about it.
Yeah.
Is that because I spent an extra $50, I now have more flexibility,
Yeah.
and I have more room where it's anywhere from 60 to $1 more, and it's great, and I'm competitive with everybody else.
Yeah, I can, and for me on on the second issue, I can keep all my prices the same. If I overprint that first issue, when I get to the second campaign, I don't have to charge more for any of those issues. I can keep everything at $12. I can keep everything at $10. And it keeps things stable, and it's in the long run, it's a much better choice.
I think it's really interesting. I think a lot of creators do not think long term, and I think that's part of the problem. I really do.
It can be tough. Like, I remember when I so like I said, I've been an entrepreneur for about 20 years now, and part of that is having a lot of failed businesses. When I first started, it gets like, I had companies that didn't work out. I had consultancies that didn't work out, and it gets to the point where you no longer fear failure, because failure, you realize it's not the end. You realize there's always something next. Like, okay, this company didn't work out. What am I going to do next? And when you get to that point, you're no longer afraid to take risks. You're no longer afraid to take a chance, and you're willing to think long term, because you know that if it doesn't work out, there's always tomorrow. And I'm really lucky that I failed so many times that nowadays I know how not to fail in most ways. I still get caught out, but when it happens, it's not the end of the world.
See, it's interesting you bring that up because I'm an eBay guy. I like selling on eBay. I have a side hustle that's extremely lucrative, and I just ended an expansion cycle in my business, which and the reason why I'm stopping is I'm exhausted. In the last 100 days, I have expanded by probably 33%, which is a lot in
Yeah,
100
for
days.
sure.
I'm owed a lot of merch, so let's leave it at that. It's a significant number. I don't think my parents know how much merch I'm owed, and they might be listening, so I'm a little scared to tell them. If they knew how much money I have cash flow, I think they'd be alarmed too. But no debt, no debt on the company, no debt. Um, but yeah, but I've had a lot of failures, a lot of things. I tried blogging, I tried everything, and the thing that got me beer money in college is what I'm doing at a very tactical level. And it's odd, but again, I agree. Failure just goes out the window.
Yeah.
And I could have easily failed on what I just did in the last 100 days. But I was like, cool, great. If I fail, okay. It's not going to
Yeah.
really change my life because I have a day job.
Yeah.
So, but,
Yeah.
it's so interesting because I think people are scared to fail. And I think that's something where, look, I mean, I ran a Kickstarter for this show, and that thing was successful, but it wasn't a success, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
But I tried something and I got criticized for it. And my response to everybody in the community was that if we don't try things, how do we know if it's going to work? How do we not know if it's going to work? How do we approach things and how do we evolve?
I
And when I said that, nobody had an answer for me.
No, the word evolve is key there. I once read something that stayed with me for over a decade now, and that it's the idea was that failure is the tuition we pay for success, you know? And that there's no sentence more true in the business world. And you don't learn the lessons unless you actually learn the lessons, and learning the lessons sucks. Like it's not great, but it's the only way to do it.
No, I agree. I agree. I agree. I've learned from my failures and I've learned from other people's failures. The best money advice I've ever gotten is watching people who are really bad at this and watching them and understanding why they're bad at this and understanding that they were trying to hit a home run when all I'm trying to do is just get a base hit.
Yeah. Yeah, and you build a business with 100 base hits. That's pretty much how it works, you know. And you strike out from time to time, but the stakes are lower when that's how you're swinging, for sure.
Yeah, you get 3 outs, guys. You get 3 outs in baseball, and if you're lucky, you have a pinch runner on every once in a while who gets to steal second. Um,
Well, it's
I'm,
I really enjoyed talking with you tonight, Andrew. This has been a lot of fun.
well,
Uh,
before you go, because I do want to give you a chance to self-promote yourself
sure.
before I have to really get back to your business. Um, where can people find you, bother you, hit you up, disturb you, check out what you do, all that fun
So
stuff?
so for the Kickstarter, the easiest way to find it is deadaircomic.com. That will always take you to the Kickstarter each and every time, regardless of which one we're running. If you want to find me on Twitter, I mean, Twitter's a bit of a cesspool these days, but you can find me at Hunting Benjamin. I'm a little more active on Instagram. People are just generally nicer, more chill there. Again, at Hunting Benjamin. And if you want to see, like, I do a lot of writing about kickstarting, about comics and my experiences with it on my own website, benjaminhunting.com. There's sections for Dead Air, there's sections for Code 45, and then there's just general comics and Kickstarter thoughts that I have there in addition to my other professional writing. So benjaminhunting.com is probably the easiest way to find everything about me, but hit me up on Instagram at Hunting Benjamin. I like sharing weird photos taking pictures of weird stuff I see, like when I'm out in the city and whatnot. It's like a relaxed way to interact online.
Well, I don't think I could have said that any better myself, and I'm going to keep saying it. You have to support indie comics, and what that means is that when they're on Kickstarter, you got to back Kickstarters. When they're off Kickstarter, you should go to people's websites if they have them for sale, or if you don't like the Kickstarter, or it's not your cup of tea, and they have another comic that you might like, you should go buy that comic if you don't already have it. Or you could always just share out the campaign. You could donate to the campaign. You don't have to get anything. You can throw a buck into it. Every dollar helps.
Everything
It does
helps.
make a big difference. But even going further outside of that, obviously social media is a really big thing. Following people on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook pages, email lists, all that stuff matters, and it does go a long way,
It really does.
directly and indirectly. So you should do that. And speaking about social media, because I like social media, all mine are down below. I am Pop Anime Comics on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. And I could say this about YouTube. I have almost 500 plus interviews out on YouTube across every sector. You name it, I've done it. And if there is not an interview for you on my YouTube channel, I cannot help you in any fashion. Because there is something for everybody, whether you're into voice actors, anime, crypto, pop culture, wrestling, adult entertainment, business, everything. Every sector has been interviewed on my show. So definitely check it out. And I can assure you this, you may or may not get smarter by watching me, but you will be entertained. That is for sure. But that is all I have. And on that note, I am going to give you the final word before I let you get back to writing comics.
Final word is, I mean, I doubled down on everything you just said. Even if you can't support a campaign on Kickstarter, sharing it online is a huge help. Putting more eyeballs on it always helps. I really appreciate that, and it's amazing how much of a difference that makes. So if you can't get to deadaircomic.com and support the book yourself, just put deadaircomic.com somewhere in your social media, and I would really appreciate it. And Andrew, I appreciate you giving me this opportunity to talk about the book, for have such an extended conversation about it and really kind of dive deep into it. It's been a lot of fun, and thank you for the opportunity.
Well, I don't think I could have said that any better myself, everybody. And that is a wrap.